Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are putting on our detective hats and learning exactly how to read the visual clues right there in our glass. We're going to figure out how to diagnose a wine's history, its overall health, and its age, all before we ever even take a single sip. Just look at this moody, gorgeous pour. It's so tempting to immediately start swirling and tasting, but the absolute truth is, the sensory analysis of wine always begins with the eyes, not the palate. The very second that liquid hits the glass, it's already telling us a story. So here is our master agenda for today's visual analysis. First, the first sip is visual. Second, decoding the color. Third, when good colors go bad. Fourth, clearing up cloudy wine. And finally, solving the sediment mystery. All right, let's jump straight into section 1. The first sip is visual. I know, we are all super eager to get to the smelling and tasting, the olfactory and gustatory phases. But visual observation is absolutely crucial. Think about it. Human beings actually process visual information tens of thousands of times faster than taste. So consider the visual phase as the opening statement in a trial. A quick glance at a wine's brightness, its intensity, and its clarity hands us the foundational evidence we need to understand exactly what we're about to drink. It reveals if the wine is young and vibrant, or maybe old and tired, long before a single drop touches our tongue. Moving right along to section 2, decoding the color. Take a moment to really look at the sheer variety of wine hues. From pale straw to a deep toasted brown, this is an absolute goldmine of information. Simply identifying whether a wine is a vibrant pale ruby or a muted deep amber gives us immediate insight into its approximate age and style. Different grape varieties inherently have different colors, right? A Cabernet Sauvignon is naturally going to be a much deeper, darker red than a delicate pale ruby Pinot Noir. And say you're looking at a white wine that's throwing off a slightly golden or amber tint. Well, that little visual clue might tell you it was made with prolonged skin contact, or maybe it's just seen some significant age. Color builds your mental repertoire. Now, this is super fascinating. Watch how red wines evolve over time. They actually lose color intensity. When a red wine is young, its phenolic compounds, specifically these pigments called anthocyanins, give it a really intense bluish-purple hue. But as oxygen slowly works its way into the wine over years in a barrel or bottle, those anthocyanins transform. You can see the color stepping down from a vibrant purple, softening into a ruby, then garnet, and eventually settling into these beautiful, muted, mature brick red and brown tones. But let's pivot to white wines, because they take the exact opposite journey. While reds fade, whites actually gain intensity as they age. They start off life as these very pale, sometimes almost greenish-yellow liquids. But as oxidation happens, they deepen remarkably. They transform into rich golden, ochre, and eventually dark brown hues. So here is the big takeaway, this amazing sensory divergence. As oxygen works its magic over the years, reds fade into mature brick colors, while whites deepen into rich golds and ambers. They are moving in completely opposite directions, yet they're both heading toward the exact same destination, brown. And why? Because the phenolic compounds in both eventually evolve into brown pigments. Grasping this concept is literally your most powerful tool for visually estimating a wine's age. Which brings us to section 3, when good colors go bad. Let's look at our true crime lineup of culprits that can basically murder a wine's color. Premature oxidation is the prime suspect here. It makes vibrant colors dull and opaque, turning whites brown and reds pale way faster than they naturally should. Then there's sunlight. Ultraviolet light literally generates free radicals that destroy those color-giving anthocyanins. This is exactly why you should always be a little suspicious of premium red wines sold in clear glass bottles. We've also got bacterial contamination like Acidobacter, which will essentially turn your expensive bottle into salad vinegar. Even tiny trace amounts of metals like iron and copper can act as catalysts that turbocharge oxidation. And lastly, a lack of sulfur dioxide, or SO2, leaves the wine completely defenseless against all these attacks. But winemakers aren't helpless. They act as proactive bodyguards. It all starts out in the vineyard with optimal harvest timing, making sure the grapes have the perfect amount of healthy anthocyanins. Inside the winery, they use temperature-controlled, cold fermentations to lock in those delicate aromatic and color compounds. For whites, they use incredibly gentle pressing to avoid pulling too many bitter, easily oxidized compounds from the skins. And crucially, they deploy controlled antioxidants like sulfur dioxide. Think of SO2 as a microscopic bouncer at a nightclub. It literally binds with oxidant molecules, blocking them from attaching to and ruining the wine's vibrant color pigments.
All right, let's pivot to section 4, clearing up cloudy wine.
Have you ever poured yourself a glass of wine and thought, that looks a little hazy? Well, that is a visual defect known as turbidity. Look at the stark contrast here. A brilliantly clear wine practically invites you in, right? But a highly turbid, cloudy wine, it looks dull, opaque, and frankly, a bit unappetizing. This simple lack of transparency instantly damages our perception of the wine's overall quality before we've even smelled it. To get a bit nerdy for a second and add some hard science to our detective work, winemakers actually measure this cloudiness. They use something called nephelometric turbidity units, or NTU. They take a sample of the wine, put it in a device called a turbidimeter, and shoot a beam of light straight through the liquid. The machine measures exactly how much of that light gets scattered by the solid matter floating around inside. So the more scattered the light, the higher the NTU, and the cloudier your wine is. Now, this unwanted haze doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's usually the direct result of a few specific failures. It could be inadequate clarification or filtration at the winery before bottling, which leaves microscopic solids suspended in the wine. It might be a bacterial infection taking hold. Or, and this is super common, it could just be the result of poor storage conditions. Wild temperature fluctuations can actually force previously dissolved compounds to bind together and form visible particles. So, if you ever leave a really nice bottle of wine baking in the trunk of a hot car, well, don't be shocked if it pours a bit cloudy. Finally, we reach section 5, solving the sediment mystery. Which brings us to a question that totally trips up a lot of casual drinkers. If you see physical sediment floating in your drink, is the wine completely ruined? Is it a sign of poor quality? Or is something much more complex going on? I mean, seeing dark chunks and gritty precipitates settled right at the bottom of your glass can definitely trigger some alarm bells. Logically, it kind of looks like dirt, and you might assume something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. But surprisingly, these precipitates are usually just natural compounds that have gracefully clumped together over a long period of time. Let's round up the usual suspects here. Sure, sediment can sometimes point to an unwanted microbial infection like Brettanomyces yeast, which unfortunately makes the wine smell like a barnyard or a Band-Aid, but usually, these solids are completely harmless. As a fine wine ages, inevitable changes in temperature, pH, and alcohol concentration cause entirely natural components like bitartrate crystals, proteins, and grouped tannins to fall out of solution and settle. They might feel a little gritty on your tongue, but they are a totally natural expected byproduct of a wine maturing beautifully in the bottle. All right, we have officially cracked the case. You now understand how reds fade to a mature brick, while whites deepen into rich ambers. You know the true crime enemies of color, exactly how to measure the haze of a cloudy pour, and why those gritty chunks at the bottom are usually a badge of honor for a well-aged bottle, not a defect. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. The next time you uncork a bottle, ask yourself, are you just having a drink, or are you actually reading the history of a living, breathing liquid right there in your glass? Keep your eyes open, detectives.